Words probably can't express how much I absolutely love the Splatterhouse series, but I'll give it a try anyway. As a child who grew up playing the Grafx 16 and watching horror movies that I probably shouldn't have been watching, playing a horror game on the Turbo was an extremely intense experience and one that I'll never forget. And interestingly, for a series that more or less hits the same couple of notes over and over again in every game, Splatterhouse has seen quite a bit of longevity and investment from Namco with several sequels, a spin-off, and a full-fledged reboot. There's also one of those little portable LCD handhelds dedicated to Splatterhouse, but I've never played that, so we're not talking about that today. But the other more mainline games are what bring me to the point of this video. While I do find every game in the series enjoyable for their own reasons, they certainly aren't all created equal. So today I'm going to run through the entire series and rank each Splatterhouse game from worst to best the only way that I know how, through my completely subjective opinions. Now again, I don't really think there is a bad game in the Splatterhouse series. Unlike most franchises with more than a few games, I think every game in the Splatterhouse series is at least baseline good. But since I have to put one of these games on the bottom of the list, Splatterhouse Graffiti probably has to take that spot. As a Famicom release that never officially made it over into the States, it's a game that I didn't even know existed until I was well into my 20s and well into collecting. It's a shame it never made it over here though, because even though the cartoony, comical tone of Wanpaku Graffiti isn't what I really want from the Splatterhouse series, it is a fun little game and a great way to spend a few hours. This game actually came out after the original in the arcades, but slightly before the port to the Turbo and the PC Engine. But unlike the TurboGrafx version, Graffiti obviously went in a more Nintendo-y, family-friendly direction, which I'm sure made sense for that system at the time. And while that sort of makes it the black sheep of the series, it also sort of makes it uniquely interesting and a fun diversion. There's also a lot of funny horror movie and pop culture references going on, which definitely keep things amusing. More importantly though, it's a fun game to play, and even if it does get a little boring and repetitious in my opinion, as far as NES and Famicom games go, this is a pretty good one, and you can still find it online for prices that aren't too terribly ridiculous. Jumping forward 20 years, we have the most recent iteration in the series, the Splatterhouse reboot from 2010, which is a decent action beat-em-up game, I guess, all things considered. It's definitely got its problems though, and it did not review well when it was launched, and a lot of the criticisms, I think, were pretty fair. Splatterhouse 2010 pretty much plays like every other action game played back then and more or less follows the God of War model. It's got combos, light attacks, heavy attacks, grabs, minigame, finishing moves, pretty much everything you would expect to see in God of War, except not nearly as well done. The basics of the combat feel and work fine though. Some of it is actually pretty fun, but the finishing moves are pretty dumb. In fact, that's probably the best way to describe this game. It's pretty dumb. But as the Earth Defense Force games show us, there's nothing necessarily wrong with being dumb as long as the game is fun. And Splatterhouse 2010 can be fun. It doesn't take the artistic direction that I probably would have wanted to see a reboot go in, but the copious amounts of gore on display, the heavy metal soundtrack, and some genuinely funny moments from Jim Cummings, who voices the Mask, definitely keep things entertaining.
Wait! I know this guy! Yeah, we are screwed.
And while the combat is far from the best in its class, it does get the job done, and there's a lot of gruesome, satisfying moves to unlock and learn. It's fairly boilerplate for the genre, I guess, but it works fine for what the game is. Unfortunately, that's about where the compliments end for the gameplay. Splatterhouse 2010 gets in its own way with really poorly put together platforming sections, half-baked side-scrolling levels, The side-scrolling levels themselves I do appreciate as a concept, and they definitely have some nice artwork and some disturbing imagery in them that feel very Splatterhousey, but sadly they just don't play well at all. Maybe they should have spent more time polishing these levels instead of Jen's knockers. Splatterhouse 2010 gets some extra points from me because it includes some pretty great ports of the original 3 games though, and really it's the best way to play them if you don't have retro consoles lying around. What's even better, the first one is actually the arcade version of the game, which is interesting to see, although I would have appreciated that and the PC Engine version. It would have been nice to have both just for the sake of curiosity, but that's a nitpick. Splatterhouse 2010 is worth getting, just don't expect the main game to blow you away in any way whatsoever. Splatterhouse II, all in all, is a worthy sequel to the original. The obvious jump from TurboGrafx to Sega Genesis definitely shows, with way more visual detail, scrolling layers in the background, and a much deeper frequency range for the music and sound effects. Although I think the tunes themselves in this game aren't as good as the ones in the original. Ultimately, Splatterhouse 2 does what a sequel is supposed to do. It pushes the boundaries of the original while largely staying true to the format. The intro alone lets you know that you're in for a massive step up from the original. Anybody very familiar with the original game should immediately notice the effort that went into one-upping it with the sequel. The original has you bashing zombies with 2x4s, well, the sequel has you attacking giant fetuses with chainsaws. So there, Splatterhouse 2 is a lot harder than the original 2, so if you're serious about seeing it through, I hope you're prepared for a lot of dying and a lot of level memorization. This actually goes so far that it drags the experience down a tad, at least for me. I don't mind some level memorization, in fact I like it in a lot of games, but I think Splatterhouse 2 leans a bit too heavily on making you learn how to beat it exactly the way they want you to. It's very strict in that regard. Its art direction takes a turn towards being fairly more disgusting and gruesome than the original, which I rather enjoy about it. And the terror mask looks a little bit more like a skull face in this game too, and I think that makes more sense than the original. It seems more logical that an ancient interdimensional demon mask would look like this rather than the original's hockey mask that looks like you would get it at Target. All that being said, while Splatterhouse 2 is probably the weakest of the original trilogy, it's still awesome and it's worthy of the name. And I highly recommend getting that 2010 reboot if for nothing else so you can play this one if you don't have a Genesis. What can be said about the original Splatterhouse that hasn't been said dozens of times? It's great. As far as I'm concerned, this is the big goddamn granddaddy of horror games. It's definitely not the first game in the genre, but I think it is the first one to do it this well. Would we still have gotten Resident Evil, Silent Hill, and Clock Tower if it weren't for Splatterhouse? I don't know, probably, but I bet they wouldn't have been quite the same. There was really nothing like this back in 1988, and it definitely scarred me and countless other kids back then who really didn't know what they were getting into. This thing in particular is single-handedly responsible for about a year and a half of straight nightmares for me. The variety of levels, the music, the epic fight with Jennifer after she turns into a monster bear, hell, all the boss fights, the whole thing really is just outstanding. Not to mention the alternate pathways and the secret hard mode that add more replay value than most other games of this type had at the time. There's so many standout moments in the game, but if I had to pick my favorite, I guess I would say the ending that starts with the final boss fight with the giant monster that the Terror Mask revives to kill Rick. Once you kill it, the mask shatters, the mansion burns down, and Rick escapes alone, leaving everything, including Jennifer, behind. How's that for an ending? Splatterhouse is a one-of-a-kind game, and it paved the way for future, more mature games like Mortal Kombat and Doom that embraced being violent and hideous as core parts of the experience, instead of just trying to appeal to mainstream family-friendly audiences. It's an actual trailblazer, and no TurboGrafx or PC Engine collection is even remotely complete without it. Splatterhouse III, this is the big one. Splatterhouse III uses a nearly perfect combination of new ideas and tried and true concepts that the first two games had established to make the absolute pinnacle experience of the series. Of the new ideas added were actual combos, grapples, being able to move horizontally and vertically, and ultimately that makes it more of a standard beat-em-up than the pseudo-platformers that the original two were. Now this makes Splatterhouse 3 a little bit divisive for many long-term fans of the series, and I understand that, but honestly I think they're all changes for the better, especially the explorable levels that have lots of weird secrets to discover if you want to. Rick is easier to control here than ever too, and the added moveset brings a lot of variety to the fights that you get into with the various monsters, which are also my favorite monster designs in the entire series. Many of them have multiple models that show damage and or completely change form throughout the fight. And the whole thing is presented to you with some of the best graphics and music you'll ever experience on the Sega Genesis. The music in particular is so good, it's easily one of my favorite game soundtracks of all time. As if all of that wasn't enough, Splatterhouse 3 also introduced the ability to transform into the insane hulked out Rick that the reboot also brought back. Using him is way more fun than it should be, he just feels like such an overwhelming force to be reckoned with. Monster Rick is probably best used to plow through longer rooms to save time, or to bail yourself out of a difficult boss fight, but no matter how you use him, it's a guaranteed blast every time you just decimate everything in your path with him. I'm really glad that they added this in, it's really the cherry on top of everything with this game. Splatterhouse 3 doesn't forget to have atmosphere and be spooky and creepy either. It has its fair share of secret rooms with creepy ghosts and hauntings, a room full of nothing but lopped off hands, and even a completely secret nightmarish level that can warp you past several stages. They really managed to cram a lot of great ideas into this game, and I think it pretty much checks all the boxes that it could. If I had to come up with one actual complaint, I guess I would have liked to have seen the ability to earn extra lives with high scores like the previous two games, instead of having to look for extra lives laying around, which are annoyingly rare. But other than that, Splatterhouse 3 is a damn near perfect game, at least to me. It's one of my favorite games of all time, and without a doubt, it is the best game in the Splatterhouse series, at least to me. Now, I know there's a lot of Splatterhouse fans out there that probably disagree with that, but hopefully I've made my case at least well enough for you to see where I'm coming from. Let me know what Splatterhouse game you think is the best in the comments below. We'll keep the conversation going, and if you enjoyed, feel free to subscribe. But until then, thanks for watching.